I'm Gintautas Dumcius, and this is the Codcast, CommonWealth Beacon's podcast about policy and civic life here in Massachusetts. Today, I'm joined by Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. We're going to do things a little bit differently, and we're going to focus on the person behind the policy, the person sitting behind the desk at City Hall. She's up for re-election this year. She's running against challenger Josh Kraft and a few others on the ballot. The preliminaries coming up. But we're going to discuss why she got into politics, how she got into politics, and my favorite topic, super PACs. We also talk a little bit about her media diet. What does she read? What does she absorb? Mayor Wu, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So I wanted to I wanted to focus on just being mayor, not so much policy for this podcast. Something I think about a lot is what Elizabeth Warren has said about people are policy. And that's why I like writing about people. I think it's something that Charlie Baker agreed with Senator Warren on. He also believed that people are policy. So I wanted to kind of focus a little bit about being mayor and being an introvert, because I remember in 2021 you mentioned that you were an introvert, and I remember thinking the mayor of Boston being an introvert, because I know the schedule. I see the photos on the official Flickr feed, and that, with all due respect to the office, looks like an introvert's nightmare. So tell me a little bit about kind of what's it like being an introvert and being a mayor?
Well, I think this is probably the biggest reason why growing up, there was just no even glimmer of possibility. It never even crossed my mind that one day I could be involved in politics at all, because naturally, I tend to be more soft-spoken. I'm usually not the person in the room who is naturally going to want to be doing the most talking. I much prefer to just listen and kind of be with people. And I think for introverts, I won't generalize across everyone, but for myself as an introvert, it doesn't mean that I don't love understanding people and really getting to know someone. It can just be some parts of the job I've had to really learn and develop my skills on. Naturally, I remember my first year campaigning in 2013 for city council. By just after the prelim, I think, I had completely lost my voice, just totally gone. By election day, you could not hear a word that I was saying, even as I was trying. And it was because in that year, I probably had spoken more words than in all of the other years of my life combined, just campaigning and going around. And so, I have an incredible team. I have an incredible family. I cherish any moments of silence that I get to have with myself, because even at home, it's 3 kids now, everyone bouncing around, wanting to tell me how their day was and getting to catch up. So, it's beautiful, and I hope, if nothing else, other people who might not see themselves in politics because they can feel more introverted as well, see an example of someone who, it doesn't mean that you don't have strong values and can and will speak up in the moments that are needed and find your voice in your own way. But I definitely have had to really learn how to feel more comfortable doing public speaking, seem more comfortable doing public speaking. But a lot of it is practice, and a lot of it is just feeling really excited about all there is to say in the neighborhoods and in the people that I get to meet on a day-to-day basis.
And something I know you've talked about in other interviews, how politics was, and I think you mentioned earlier, how politics was not something that your family was involved in growing up. Although I think you mentioned in one interview that was it your grandmother on your mother's side was a precinct leader? Or
I didn't learn that until after I was elected, and it had never been part of the family lore. But my mom's mom worked, which at the time was also very rare for a woman with kids to be a professional and to be working. And she was also quite civically engaged, although no one had ever shared that with me.
And do you remember what your first kind of political event was, or the kind of the first campaign you got involved in, and why? Because I know you've said, or it's been written, that you didn't know whether you were going to be a Democrat or Republican when you went off to Harvard. But what was your first political event?
Yeah, I remember that moment in the Harvard cafeteria, first week of school, when everyone was going around and saying their name, where they were from, and what political party they were. And I truly did not know at that moment, because we'd never talked about it at home and hadn't been involved. I'd never met a politician or elected official by the time I'd gone to college. And actually, that first year, I got an invitation through the Harvard email system or something, because the Kennedy School was hosting their annual training session for new members of Congress. And I guess there was one dinner where if you were a constituent, they would invite you to meet your newly elected member of Congress. And so I got this invitation to a cool dinner. I figured I would go and meet that person. I showed up. It was at the JFK Library. So went all the way into Boston for it. And turns out that my particular congressperson had decided to skip that event among the festivities of the training weekend. So I was there. I was at a table and just sitting next to one other person, and all of the other people were talking to their congresspeople. So I was kind of by myself. And then I asked her what she did, and she said she was an author. And I was like, oh, okay, now I truly didn't get to meet any politicians at all. And then the event started, the speaking program kicked off, and then they announced the keynote speaker, Doris Kearns Goodwin, who then stood up from next to me and gave her remarks. And so that was how I first met Doris, when I didn't even have any idea of anything. And I think since then, early on in Boston, getting involved in Democratic ward committees, being involved in the Ward 4 committee based in the South End, and getting to throw our ice cream socials for candidates and seeing the power of getting real people involved.
I realized that my first political event was also through Harvard. My father took me to a rally that Jesse Jackson had. This was obviously like in the 80s, but my dad would take me and my brother to stuff like that. If Christopher Hitchens was in town or something like that, we'd see it at the BPL or at Harvard. So.
And you were excited at that moment, or as a kid, were you like, what was your interest level and engagement?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly at some of I would say probably the lectures, I brought like a little notebook, and I just did kind of like, drawings or whatever. But I remember I had like a stuffed little lion that I brought to the Jesse Jackson rally, and I remember, waving the lion and Jesse Jackson seeing me and waving back, and so that was. And my family was always kind of like, we would have debates on at the dinner table and all that, which, I mean, my mother didn't really, she's kind of apolitical, but my father was very much into, like, we had CNN on all the time, and 3 newspapers, which made us a very abnormal household. But yeah, so I want to get back to Doris Kearns Goodwin. You've kept in touch through I assume through the years. She's now a Boston resident, I think.
She's amazing. I get to see her from time to time, and just love getting her wisdom. There's all that she has researched and written about and experienced and led. I'm very, very honored to be able to still know her today and to be able to get some of her advice from time to time.
What's not to put you on the spot? Well, I guess it's a podcast, right? So I got to put you on the spot. What's the best piece of advice she's given you?
I am a big devotee of the concepts within her Bully Pulpit volume around the idea of the power of the media, but also the relationship between how to get directly to people and the sort of direct role and responsibility of, passing legislation or funding a budget or deciding certain programs, but also the impact of being a cultural force and shining a light on certain issues versus others, or highlighting the work that is happening in certain parts of the community. So I think that's the area where I try to remember that there's a huge impact for everyone who has a platform, especially in this moment.
So obviously, there's the election coming up. It's nonpartisan, but something I'm always very curious about is why someone enrolls in a party. I'm someone who's happily unenrolled. And I've said this to other guests. I think it probably goes back to my atheism, where I'm just skeptical of all sorts of beliefs. But why pick a party, and why did you end up choosing the Democrats?
I think I came of age in Chicago in a moment where, so right after graduating from college, I had to go back to Chicago for a bit because my mom was really struggling with mental health challenges, and that happened to be in the window during the Obama the first presidential campaign. And so not only was there a direct kind of local connection to this idea that hope and change and building a world that was focused on bringing everyone into the conversation was possible. I think the idea as a person who has grown, as someone who's grown up in an immigrant family, that the systems and programs that exist don't often feel like they are designed for everyone, and certainly don't include everyone to the extent that is possible or right. And so the basic idea of fairness, of wanting to make sure that if you don't kind of fit the traditional mold, you still belong, and that there's a home and a place for everyone in our community. That's always been kind of my guiding philosophy before I knew anything about politics, before I could speak the language of anything related to government. From a very young age, seeing what my parents went through as immigrants, facing language barriers and cultural barriers, and then through experiences of living in a family with mental health issues and challenges that really impacted so much of our daily lives. With my mom's journey, the driving force that has kept me kind of fighting has been around wanting to make sure that people get to stand up for who they are and what they deserve, what everyone is entitled to, and everyone having the chance at a decent life and a way to raise their families, no matter how long you've been in this country, no matter what language you speak, no matter what you look like, no matter who you are. There should be a place where you belong. And that's what's always drawn me to cities too. And especially now, that's the vision and the hope for the city of Boston.
The Globe, Boston Globe, put out a poll recently that showed, obviously low approval ratings for Donald Trump. A lot of people upset about his administration and all the actions they're taking. But the other thing that seemed interesting in that poll was people are also upset, if not more upset, with Democrats and unhappy with Democrats. I want to ask you, what you're out there, you're talking to folks and engaging. What's your sense of why are people upset with Democrats?
I think we're at a point in the world where there's just a lot of words everywhere. There's a lot of talking, and it can feel like the same conversations or the same kind of rhetoric or finger pointing. And then at the end of the day, the question is, what's actually changing? What are you actually feeling in your life? My mom would give me a lot of advice growing up in Chinese, and some of it filtered through her daily Oprah watching, and some of it from kind of a Confucian background growing up in Taiwan. But one phrase that she would say to my siblings and I all the time was, the Chinese equivalent. When you point a finger at someone else, you have four fingers pointing back at yourself. And I try to take that to heart, right? As kids, that's why we would always just point all five fingers. If we need to blame a sibling for something, you just change the gesture. But I think even now, at the city level, for example, there's a lot to point to in terms of direct harms that are coming from this federal administration around our economy, around our, attacks on our key industries, on public education, on public workers and the National Park Service and government itself and everything in between. And at the same time, what are we doing at the city level? Are we taking every possible step within our power to be the force that's trying to bring some stability and some sense of forward movement to our community? So I think that's how I have interpreted the frustration that's out there in the world, that it's not about kind of a particular party or affiliation, but it's things aren't great right now. And there are reminders of that all around every single day, watching, turning on the TV, seeing news headlines. And we all need a reason to have hope. We all need proof that forward momentum is still possible. And I think city government has a really key role to play in that, because this is still the level of government where you can get things done, where people can still come together across differences because you share a sense of loyalty and stake in the place that and the community that you share across those differences. And that's why there's a really, really important role for the city of Boston right now to be the proof point that we can still make people's lives better.
That kind of leads into the next question I have, and it seems like some of what you're getting at is effectiveness. And I know something that came up in a recent New York City mayoral debate was two of the major candidates for mayor. They were asked to name, all of them were asked to name the most effective Democrat in the country, and two of them named you. Why do you think that was? What's the? I assume you've seen the clip.
I'm very honored, and I will take with relish any moment where New Yorkers are acknowledging Boston's dominance in the world and our being the champions. I think this was part of a mayoral debate, and the truth is that it can be, even as I was coming into this job almost 4 years ago, it can be hard to find examples that are kind of universally acknowledged as successful examples of progressives who are in the executive role, right? Progressive mayors or progressive, governors or whatever it is. I think there are, sometimes tensions within the drive to use government as the biggest force for change and for the public good, and also to really scrutinize and make sure there's accountability and transparency on every bit of action, and to be rightly, validly skeptical of government and skeptical of institutions that, historically and for a lot of reasons can tend to just perpetuate their own power through inertia and where it's really hard to change things. And so finding that space where you get things done that add up to big things in terms of the public good and making change and fixing systems and longstanding problems, some of this is just about issues that didn't happen overnight, not being able to be immediately fixed, but how do you demonstrate that there's real progress and that it's measurable and impactful and lasting? I think a lot of the examples that people point to when it comes to, progressive leaders on the executive side can be from even outside the country sometimes. So I take it as a real honor that the city of Boston is now in a place where we, at least in some places, in some corners, are being acknowledged for the real progress that we've seen here. This is because of our collaborations across the public sector, community members, every, philanthropy, private sector, et cetera. We're a place where community safety and being the safest major city in the country has been possible because of how we work together and because of how we blend accountability with direct advocacy and reform. We created the greatest number of affordable housing units over the last 3 years than in any 3-year period over at least 25 years. And we've expanded universal pre-K, broken records when it comes to paid youth summer jobs participation, invested in open space, just the totality of what it takes to be a city for people and for families all has to happen at the same time. And so I really appreciate the vote of confidence from Brad Lander and Zoran Mamdani. I think what we share is a love for cities and a belief that in a time when so many people are throwing rocks and saying that cities are horrible, scary, dangerous places that just need to be stopped or people need to be protected from them. In fact, cities are amazing. Cities are places where people come together across all different backgrounds, where the only place where you can have some unexpectedly delightful experience every single day, something that wasn't predicted, but a public art installation or a conversation with a stranger or running into someone that you know. And there's so many amazing things that happen in Boston across our neighborhoods. And I imagine that my counterparts in New York City would say as well, that really are wildly different from some of the narrative. And I think it's important to stand up for that progress, because ultimately that's about standing up for people, for our values, and for the idea that cities are places where people can and should thrive.
So I'd be remiss if I didn't put the same question to you. Who do you think is the most effective Democrat in the country right now?
I don't know. I mean, I think that's, in some ways, I feel like that's part of the problem, is it's not about reducing things to one person, one elected official, certainly. I think we have seen more and more that there are effective organizers getting things done and finding a cohesive and organized message to get out there. In Boston, we recently had the combination of the Pride Parade and No Kings demonstration, and it was beautiful. It was joyful and peaceful, and highlighted a lot, I think tapped into a lot of Boston's own history, standing up to kings, standing up to bullies, refusing to back down when our values are challenged. So I would point to the organizers and the people in the community who are standing up right now. More and more people are in this moment, even though we're facing a federal administration that is explicit about their cruelty, about intimidation, about retaliation. And that's all designed to try to isolate people and bully you into being silent. And so those who have a platform right now, who do have the safety and the resources to be able to speak out, it's really important to do so.
We've got a limited time left, so I do want to touch on my favorite topic, something I've been covering since at least 2013, super PACs, which I realize it's also you've been on the ballot for as long as super PACs have been around. And I remember in 2021, your opponent told them to stay out, mostly because they were doing more harm than good. But you said they should stay positive, and I don't think you said that this time around. But I wanted you to get your sense about super PACs and obviously spending a lot of money. Unions are coming in to help you. Jim Davis and Robert Hale and other millionaires and billionaires are coming in on the other side. Should super PACs stay out or stay positive or just do their thing?
If the question is, should super PACs exist? No, right? I firmly believe that our campaign finance system, allowing for big money to have such a role, really undermines the voices and kind of basic values of our democracy. We are in the system that we're in, unfortunately, and the reality is that it does have an impact. And we've seen numerous races, I mean, lots and lots of examples, most, especially at the federal level, I would say, but increasingly at the local level as well, where millions of dollars of attack ads pouring in can have a real impact. I would say that Bostonians are known for being incredibly sharp and discerning, right? Our sports fans are known as among the most intense and the smartest analysis, right, on the fly, and from watchers around the country, people will say that about Boston. And similarly, Boston voters, especially Boston municipal voters, are probably the smartest voters anywhere in the country. And so I believe that our voters will see through and won't fall for the misleading wave of attacks that's been coming in. We know what's happening in our city. We know that the advances that have been made, certainly haven't, we still have a lot more work to do on every front. But what we're seeing in terms of public safety, in terms of housing, job creation, supporting our young people and investing in public education, making sure our seniors have what they need, moving forward on climate. In every area, I am really proud of the work that has been happening, both from our city workers and the teams that we've built who are serving the public every single day in a really challenging time to be in the public sector, and from our community members who you just can't get anything by in Boston. You can't fake it in Boston. And I have faith in our city and in the voters of the city to show where we've been and to make their voices heard.
So I just wanted to make sure. So I'm not hearing any of the same kind of stay positive or.
No, I absolutely believe the same thing, right? And I think I've said it before, if not explicitly, right? I believe that negative attacks really end up undermining people's connection to politics, right? If anything, it has become so normalized in a way that it ends up just turning people off to wanting to be involved, right? Why dive in if you believe, if you're constantly seeing messages that everything's bad and institutions don't matter and, this and that are things that we shouldn't trust or believe are real. And so, again, I don't believe that there should be big money shaping any races. The system that we're in, it's important to have the truth come out. It's important to highlight what we're doing in the city of Boston. And so I would certainly say stay positive and tell the real story of what's happening in our city. But, that ship in some ways has sailed in this election cycle because we've already had millions of dollars from Trump mega donors, from out-of-state billionaires pouring in that are flooding people's text messages, TV, ads, all trucks driving around, parking in crosswalks, really tearing down Boston, tearing down our values. And I guess the biggest thing for me is that it just feels like a missed opportunity as well. It'd be one thing if there were lots of communications coming in saying, here's one choice, here's another choice. There's differences in positive visions for where the city should go. That is the kind of conversation that we deserve as residents in a democracy. It is so precious once every 4 years for people to take a little bit more of their time that's so busy with their family and jobs and everything else and give it to thinking about politics and government and our future as a city. And instead of having a real conversation about where we are and what we still need to do, we're just in this kind of mess of constant mudslinging attacks and, left from all over the place, just tearing down Boston. And it's disrespectful to the voters. It's extremely disrespectful to the city workers who have been working so hard and have made a lot of progress and have put Boston on the map on so many issues. But I know I'm going to stay positive, and I hope that we can have a real conversation about our city's future and about the issues.
We'll definitely be keeping an eye on that. As like I said, it's my favorite topic. So just by way of, I've been covering it for so long, I feel like I can't stop now. So I wanted to close out by asking. It's just something I ask folks when they're on. What's the media diet? What do you consume? And on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, long form, short form. What do you enjoy or hate read? if the term works.
I really live and breathe Boston, so I am probably reading way too much detail into every line of every story about anything local across all of the platforms and all of the local media. I also get reports from my team on what's happening in the neighborhood. So I would count as sort of how I get my news, not just the newspapers and radio, et cetera, the quote unquote formal media, but also what's happening. What are the reports in from neighborhood associations? What's the buzz from this or that community organization? And at the local level, in some ways, that's what can drive the news, and that's often where news breaks first, is at a meeting at a community center, in the basement room where people are talking about some issue that needs to be addressed. I don't have much quiet time, so as much as I wish I had the time to just be listening to podcasts, I don't get a lot of podcasts in or other kind of national trending influencer types, and I scan where I can on social media, on Blue Sky in particular. But for me, it's usually all Boston all the time.
I can confirm, as from my early days as Dorchester reporter, that the news does come out of those civic association meetings in basements. No national public, not governing magazine or anything like that, or.
Governing is great. I'll scan Governing from time to time. I get the alerts. I scan the New York Times. Where there are relevant articles, I'll usually, kind of find my way to them, either someone sending them to me. But in terms of my daily routine and daily diet, I tend to be very, very locally focused.
Well, I appreciate the time, Mayor. I'm sure we'll try to have you back on before the prelim or the final, and thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me again.
Thanks again to Mayor Wu for joining me on the podcast, and thank you for listening. I'm Gintautas Dumcius. Our producer is Charlie Cazella. Please leave a rating and review wherever you're hearing this now if you want to help other folks find us, and send an email to codcast@commonwealthbeacon.org if you ever want to get in touch directly.